Let me know when you're ready for me to take down the agenda and get started.
Okay, we're ready for you to get started.
All right. Would you like me to give my normal spiel about how
Yes,
everybody's
please. Yes.
muted? Okay.
Yes.
We wouldn't miss it, Will.
Oh, I think you'll be able to recite it pretty soon. So everyone, welcome to Jane and David's meeting. They will officially kick it off in a second, but I just want to give everybody a heads up that everybody is muted from the beginning of the meeting. You will not be able to unmute yourself. The way that you'll be recognized is by raising your hand through the raise hand feature in the participants menu. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon that says participants and has the number 22 next to it. Open that. There will be a button on the left-hand side of that menu that opens up that has raise hand. So whenever Jane and David call for any questions or comments, you'll just use that feature to be recognized, and then we'll go one by one down the list and unmute each of the speakers. And I think that's mostly it. If you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. And if anybody has questions, you can always chat me through the chat box.
Okay, so we're going to start. Will, could you read off the first agenda item? It's on Madison Avenue and...
Yes, 706 to 708 Madison Avenue, southwest corner of Madison Avenue and 63rd Street, 702 and 704 Madison Avenue, adjacent to the first two, 22 East 63rd Street, around the corner from the first. And they're all in the Upper East Side Historic District. They're three interconnected structures. 706, 708 is a neo-federal style bank building designed by Frank Easton and constructed in 1922. 702 and 704 Madison Avenue and 22 East 63rd Street are designed by Page Ayers Crowley and constructed in 2014 to 2016. Space Smith Architects. The application is for work on the front elevation and at the roof of 706, 708 Madison Avenue, and for work in the front elevation and at the roof at 702 and 704 Madison and 22 East 63rd Street.
Great, thank you, Will. So we're going to get started. Is the applicant here?
I do see several of their representatives. There's Kaz. Is Kaz or Kaz? You can unmute yourself. There's a button you'll have to select.
Hi, good evening.
And Cass,
you can drop in your presentation. Will help you with that if you need help.
Yeah,
okay.
You can now start sharing your screen. And Michael, should I unmute Michael at the same time?
You should, Michelle Franck, yes.
Michelle,
please.
I'm so sorry.
Yes,
right.
No problem.
Let me go up to the beginning. And our mechanical engineer is with us just in case there are questions. Katie Tuttle. So if you want to unmute her, or maybe when we get to questions, you can unmute her. But let me know when you're all ready for me to begin.
We're ready, thank you.
Okay.
Make sure you give dimensions, measurements, etc.
I will do my best, and if I forget, just ask me, and we'll circle back to it. So
Great.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm Cass Stackelberg from Higgins, Quaysbarth and Partners. As I mentioned, Michelle Franck from Spacesmith, who is the architect of record, is on the line as well, as is Katie Tuttle, Henderson engineer. She's the MEP engineer. Michelle and Katie are available for questions. I'm going to run through the presentation. Our clients from Hermes are also on the call as well. As I said, I'll go through the presentation, and if you have questions afterwards, any one of us will step in and answer questions. The project is for Hermes, who will be relocating from its flagship location at 691 Madison, one block to the south, to this collection of three buildings on 63rd and Madison. As I mentioned, this is the southwest corner of the building. Historically, a bank building at the corner, and as you noted in the introduction, new construction dating to 2014, 2016, flanking it here at 702 Madison, 702, 704 Madison, and 22 East 63rd Street. We will be presenting at a public hearing at Landmarks on July 21st. And the scope of that review is for signage and awnings, storefront and window replacement, and rooftop mechanicals and railings. And I'll take you through each aspect of the project. You all may know, this is obviously, you know the neighborhood very well. This is the current location of Hermes's flagship, 1 block to the south on the northeast corner of 62nd and Madison, 1920s commercial building designed by McKim White. It's actually subject to an MOU from 1984 for modification of bulk. Hermes moved in 1999, and at that time, in addition to the signage that you see here, they proposed and had approved by the commission the installation of their Cavalier, which is an emblem of all their flagship stores around the world. This was approved, as I said, at a public hearing by the commissioners. And in the permit for this installation, the C of A notes that this sign or this sculpture on the roof would be in keeping with historic advertising methods and would be in keeping with the commercial character of Madison Avenue. And I point this out because as this store, when this store closes and the other store opens, we are proposing to install a similar statue on the roof of 706 Madison. A bit of history. This photo on the left from 1923 shows the bank building, the Bank of New York building, as it was completed in 1922, flanked by row houses on the south on Madison, as well as the west on 63rd Street. The 1940s tax photo shows a changing scene. This facade was replaced in 1930 with this commercial frontage. And as well, by 1940, the row house on the west side had been demolished by the bank, and they had taken over the side yard. A 1980s designation photo from the Landmarks Commission showing that the commercial building had been also demolished, that in 1940, and replaced with a 2-story extension of the bank. And then you can see this brick wall and side yard on the 63rd Street side of the bank building. Fast forward to current day, just to look at the current conditions of the building. So again, this is the historic building at 706 Madison, and then this is the 4-story commercial building to the south at 702, 704 Madison. The certificate of appropriateness and the permit for this construction designed by Paige Cowley included the demolition of that extension, construction of a 4-story building, new storefront infill, signage, and construction of the building on 63rd Street. One significant thing to note, which I'll come back to later in the presentation, is that this proposal, as approved, did not include any mechanical equipment for the entire complex. The idea was that the architecture was approved, and when the building was tenanted, the mechanical systems would be designed and proposed as part of that future work. So that is part of what we are presenting to you this evening. Turning the corner on 63rd Street, again, the original historic bank building, and then the 2014, 2016 5-story building filling in that 1-story fence and side yard. Storefront infill in polished brass here on 63rd as well as on Madison Avenue. So turning to our proposal, this is an existing photo on the left, and then a rendered view on the right. And just to give you God bless you, an overview of the scope of work at 702, 704, replacing the existing infill, storefront infill with new infill matching the detailing and configuration, but in a dark painted metal and signage at the sign band. Installing awnings at the 2nd floor here and around 706. Replacing the entry door at 706 and replacing the replacement wood windows at the ground floor of 706. The installation of a Cavalier at the corner, and then mechanical equipment and railings that are not visible in this photo. We'll get into details of each of those in just a moment. Looking at this existing photo and then an elevation, sort of similar scope, I'm not going to spend much time here. Most of the changes are occurring at the ground level, at the storefronts and the entry, as well as the rooftop mechanicals. And then of course the Cavalier on the roof of 706. The 63rd Street elevation, again, as I mentioned, replacing the windows, replacing the door here, the side entry on 63rd, a new storefront infill at the base of the 63rd Street entry here. Turning to the details, the main entry, as I said, to 706 Madison, currently has a wood door. This door dates to the recent rehabilitation of the building. It had been shorter when there was a step here. That step was removed for accessibility and the door was reconstructed. And so this is a new door. The proposal really for transparency and visibility into the store is to replace the wood doors with a paneled glass paired door. So you can see these are actually beveled glass panels set into the leaves, and then a kick plate at the bottom. So you see it sort of in rendered elevation, line drawings, and then in plan, these are the swing doors here, and then an interior vestibule which will provide security for the store on the interior. We're also proposing to remove these railings which served a function when there was a step here, but now no longer serve a function. One thing I want to just go back just to point out that I neglected to mention, and I think it's clear in these photographs. Currently, when you look at this photo, you can see the window sills are at about 5 feet. So one of the reasons that we're proposing to replace this opaque wood door with a glass door is to allow for views actually into the store from passersby on the street. And so you can see this person walking by on Madison, and then similarly here on 63rd, just given the height of these sills, one doesn't see into the store from the sidewalk. So there's a desire for improved transparency at the main entry on Madison and on 63rd Street. The other piece of the work at the entrance, presently there is a sign that says the Bank of New York carved into a marble panel. The proposal is to put a new marble panel in front of that, not removing the historic sign, but actually installing a new new marble panel with stainless steel letters, 7 inches tall. These letters are not illuminated and set onto a panel. A bit of detail on that. So the existing sign panel here and the new paneled sign sitting in front of it, and you can see it in section with dimensional letters not illuminated. Continuing to the storefront work on at the base of 702, 704 Madison. Presently, there are polished brass storefront infill. The proposal is to replace that with painted metal storefronts, matching the configuration of the existing in a dark charcoal black finish. Again, 7-inch tall non-illuminated letters in stainless attached to the sign bands above each of the storefront panels. Decal signage as well on the storefront doors and typical installations in that regard. So turning to the base of the 63rd Street side of the building. So presently, again, the polished brass infill, that's the existing, and this is the proposed condition. And then in plan, you can see presently there is an egress door here and a partial wall which is set back from the window. Given the needs for security and also marrying the needs for egress, our proposal on the interior is to create a security office here off the side entry of the building. And in doing so, we're proposing to shift this wall forward and create a vitrine. So this will be a display with Hermes scarves in the window. And it will be a sort of an enclosed vitrine so that one doesn't see into the sort of egress corridor and security area, but we'll have something actually attractive to look at. So, and then a metal door, solid door, again, to preclude views into this egress corridor. The transoms will be back painted again to mask some of the systems and things that are up in the ceiling above this part of the interior sort of back of house area for the building. Turning to the windows. So the windows at the base of 706 Madison, again, these were replaced in the Page-Cowley scheme. They are wood windows at present. We are proposing to match the configuration, the profiles, the color, and dimensions of these wood windows, but in steel. And the reason for that is for security. It's very important to provide security at the base of the building, and these wood windows do not provide security as required, but the steel windows do. We have a series of details. These have been updated from what we sent to you previously, but you can see now properly drawn in section. We're matching the brick mold here. This is the existing on the left, the proposed on the right. Dimensions are nearly identical. The muntins are 5/8 of an inch. They'll go up to by 1/4 inch to 7/8. Meeting rail 2.5 is just slightly larger than the 2 1/8. The other important element is that these windows will be positioned in the openings in exactly the same plane as the existing windows, which is very important given the scale of the building and the fact that we're only proposing to change the windows at the ground floor and not the second floor. This is a plan section now, looking sort of down at the window. So this is the existing window on the left and the proposed window on the right. Again, you see the trim, the muntins, and dimensionally, this is very close to the existing window. Other elements at 706 Madison at the corner building is the installation of fabric awnings with loose skirts. We're proposing a 4-inch, 4 1/4 tall logo on the flap of the skirt. And this would be at the second floor of 706 Madison, but also at the second floor of 702, 704 Madison. Turning to the roof now of 706 Madison, this is the existing condition. There are 2 scope items to discuss at the roof. The first is, as I mentioned, the positioning of the Cavalier statue at the corner, same position as at 62nd Street at the existing store, but now facing northeast as opposed to the other that faces southwest. So it is the installation of the statue, and then also, as I'll show you details in a moment, the installation of a new railing taking the place of the existing glass railing inboard of the balustrade. First, the Cavalier, so you can see it stands on its own base inboard of the stone balustrade. There is no impact to the historic material. It stands inboard and above that balustrade. This is a photo, as I showed before, of the Cavalier on 62nd Street. So basically the same statue. Because the store at 76th Street will not open until it's complete, and sorry, the store at 691 Madison will not close until the one at 706 is ready to open. It is likely that this will be a new statue, not a relocated version of this one. The other element is just a simple iron railing inboard of this low balustrade, and I'll show you a detail of that on this sheet. So this is a view from the roof looking out toward Madison Avenue. You can see it's an open balustrade that does not meet code for a few reasons. One, the spacing between the individual balustrades is greater than 4 inches, but the height of the railing is also 6 inches short of the code required 3'6". So the proposal is to remove the glass railing that's there presently and install a simple iron picket railing inboard of the balustrade and shown here. So 6 inches taller than the top rail of the balustrade. And then just set, you can see in plan here and here, inboard of the existing. The final element of the proposal is the rooftop mechanical equipment. And as I said at the outset, the current building and the current approval from 2014 anticipated rooftop mechanical equipment, but it did not include any rooftop mechanical equipment. Our client is had to sort of figure out a way to fit the equipment first within the existing roof plan, and then realizing that there were some deficiencies in that, an updated roof plan. So showing you the existing approved roof plan with a series of new skylights here, and then some ductwork. Hopefully you can see these 6 points. These are structural elements meant to receive dunnage for the mechanical equipment. So the concept had been that the mechanical equipment would be in this zone, and it would be to the south of the skylight. So Madison Avenue is running here, 63rd Street is running here. This is a large elevator bulkhead and a stair bulkhead here. So this was sort of the natural place to put the mechanical equipment as planned 6 or 7 years ago. It's on the taller portion, it's on the new construction, and putting the mechanicals here allows us to not put any mechanicals on the low roof of the historic building at 706. One of the deficiencies, though, of this plan was that it did not account for the 6-foot clearance that's required by the fire department for mechanical, for clearances around mechanical equipment. So you can see if the dunnage is here and the skylight is here, you didn't have 6 feet to circulate between the equipment, the future equipment, and the skylight. And that was one of the main hurdles for the design of the mechanical equipment as part of this project. So our proposed roof plan is shown here on the right. And I'll take you through a few components. The first and foremost you might notice is it's a different skylight. And because of this clearance issue, we are required to actually reconstruct these skylights to allow for the proper 6-foot fire department clearance around the mechanical equipment. So you see a low slung skylight, not visible from the street, but it roughly in the same position, but smaller to accommodate that clearance. The equipment, there are a few component parts that are part of this review. One is a large package unit, a mechanical unit here, which is basically a whole series of air conditioning units, air handlers that are combined into a single enclosed unit. And this unit incorporates acoustical deadening to quiet the noise. It's a single unit instead of individual units with a large acoustical screen to hide it. It's all a single packaged unit that lives here, and it's pushed as far to the south as it can be. There's a taller building directly to the south, so this is sort of a logical place for it. There are smaller units here. These units serve the cellar across all 3 buildings. This unit serves 45,000 square feet of all the above ground, first floor and above, all the mechanical air conditioning equipment for all of those floors. The ones over here just serve the cellar. There are low units here that are not visible from the street. And then there's some flues and things back in this corner, also not visible from the street. I'll just point out that there is a catwalk here, and the reason that is there is the ductwork for this large unit comes out to the north, not visible, out of the back of this unit, and it's necessary to have a catwalk over that ductwork in order to sort of get up and over to this roof level. This level is depressed at the roof level, so you don't see this. But I just wanted to sort of explain that, and then I'll take you through a series of visibility studies where I can illustrate to you sort of what elements are visible. This is just a simple drawing just showing the new skylight, 3 feet in height above the roof slab, so very low profile, and as I said, not visible from the surrounding street. So turning to the visibility of the equipment, the good news is that there is no visibility of any of the equipment directly across the street on Madison Avenue. This view here, there is the tiniest point right here. Hopefully you can see with my cursor. That is the front edge right here of this large packaged unit here. And then we've rendered it here. So it's just going to be a sort of medium gray enclosed unit. This can be painted any color because of the sort of metal cladding around the unit. So we'll be painting it just a neutral gray color. And then you can see this historic addition on top of this row house. This blocks views from the south of all the equipment on the roof. This axonometric is just illustrating sort of the different component parts, and I'll take you through it quickly. Here's the skylight, here's the package unit, here's the elevator bulkhead and stair bulkhead, and then the low equipment on this roof, and the equipment here that you don't see. So I'll then take you around the building. On 63rd Street, there's the smallest amount of visibility here. This is one of the units that serves the cellar. As you move to the west, looking back at the building, there is no visibility of mechanical equipment from this area. Turning back to the corner, so now we're standing on the northeast corner of 63rd and Madison, looking back at the building. This is our mock-up, and this is the visibility of that package unit over the parapet of the recently constructed building. So as I mentioned, one of the goals has been to locate all the mechanical equipment on the new construction so that we didn't have any visible mechanical equipment above the historic building. Heading up Madison Avenue, now looking south and southwest, 2 elements you're seeing here, the front edge again of the packaged unit, and then here, this is the equipment serving the cellar. So a little bit of that unit, and then the rendered view, obviously seen with taller buildings behind it, not silhouetted against the sky, and somewhat visible, but not over the not on the historic building. And then finally, the last visibility study looking south from 64th Street, a long exposure here with a shorter building in the foreground. What you see here basically is the side of that package unit here. The catwalk that I mentioned is down here. You see a little of the railing on the catwalk, but this is all sitting up here. It will be painted a neutral gray color and hopefully will fade into the background with the taller buildings beyond. And then finally, just a final rendering. I think one thing that's important is with the scope of work, this historic building, this simple neo-federal bank building remains a distinct element in the composition with changes really at the ground floor with the windows and the door, the introduction of the cavalier at the roof and the railing and the signage, and then the changes at 702, 704 Madison and at 63rd Street for storefront changes and signage and the rooftop mechanical equipment. So this is all now sort of bringing life into this earlier approval. And we think that with this simple approach, we found an appropriate solution and we hope that, that you concur. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's your presentation.
That is my presentation, yes.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to the application?
And just a friendly reminder that that is found through the participants menu at the bottom of your screen, and you'll use the raise hand feature to ask a question.
Do you see anyone, Will, from the public?
I do see one person, Wendy, and oh, Michael, I'm gonna unmute you again. Michael was the other presentation or other presenter.
Yeah, Michelle Frank.
Michelle,
I'd like
so
to add,
sorry.
no problem. I'd like to add one item.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Oh, sorry. My name is Michelle Frank, and I'm the architect of record for the renovation. And we've been working with Cass on this presentation. I just wanted to add one item is that there is an existing flagpole. The flagpole has been on the building for a number of years. In general, MS has no use for a flagpole or for the flagpole itself. So we'd like to ask the possibility that the flagpole also be removed as part of the design for this project.
Thank you. That's your only comment?
That is my only comment.
If there's no one else from the public, we'll go to the community board alphabetically.
There's one more.
Is there another comment?
Yeah, Wendy. I'm going to ask Wendy to unmute.
Hi, thanks, Will. It's a beautiful presentation. I am curious, though, about the removal of...
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Wendy McIver. I live on the Upper East Side. And in fact, as a child, I had used the bank that had existed there, which was the original bank was founded by Alexander Hamilton. At any rate, it's a lovely building and it's a lovely presentation, but I am concerned about the complete removal of the historic signage designating where the bank was, and can that be preserved and just moved even over to the side in a plaque, something to designate part of our history. It's a very important part of our history and the nation's history.
Thank you very much. That's it. She made a comment. We're going to go to the community board members alphabetically. Will.
All right. First one would be Elizabeth Ashby. Elizabeth.
I do think this is a very fine presentation. I think getting rid of the flagpole is a great idea. It just sort of is sticking there for no purpose. My one regret is that the change of the multi-pane windows. I understand the reason, and I probably will support this, but I would prefer the look of wood windows. There's particularly because this is such a great building here. But otherwise, I think I'll support this.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Next would be Gail Barron. Gail?
I agree with Elizabeth. I think it was an excellent presentation. I am also concerned regarding the multi-paned windows. I understand the need for a retailer to be able to ensure that any possible clients or patrons can see in at all. And I also am curious as to whether or not there's any way that a wooden window can be made as secure as a steel window, because I believe it was security as the reason why you were changing from wood to steel.
Correct.
Yes, indeed.
If you could respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
Michelle, do you want to, I'd like to address the sort of detailing issue, but Michelle, do you want to speak to the security issue?
Yes. The MS stores very often are subject to vandalism, or as evidenced over the last few months in New York, unfortunately, that is the case, and also break-ins. The MS company takes very great pride in the security of the buildings, and in all the locations where they tried to break into the buildings, they were not successful during these last riots, except in Boston, where they managed to push in the entire window. The glass didn't break, but the entire glass and frame were pushed into the building. So we have a lot of experience with this, and we have learned that steel windows do need to be anchored into the brick building. There is no wood window that could withstand the pressure and the threat of people throwing or even thieves breaking into the window. So the only way that we really will be able to provide a safe space is to have a steel window, or essentially a frame, a glass that is all encompasses with a steel frame that is open like the adjacent building 72, 74, but that it would not be in keeping with the building. So we're trying to do the best possible thing by having a steel window that is essentially mimicking the existing wood frame as much as possible, and maintaining the mullions in the same appearance as the existing wood frame.
Sorry,
I think
just to address the detail. Sorry, Jane. Just to address the detailing point. I think I certainly understand the committee members' comments about wood versus steel, but I think what's important is to remember is that these are, these windows are 4 years old. They are, recent construction. They have applied muntin grids. You can, I don't know if you can see this clearly. I can zoom in. They have insulated glass and applied muntin grids on the front and the back. And that is, the detailing is very similar. The profile of the applied muntin that we're proposing. We'll also be installing a spacer bar actually between the front and back applied muntin, so it actually reads like a true divided light from a distance, from close up. So I think while there is a definite difference in material, the finish for these steel windows will be the same finish as the wood windows on the second floor. And I think just understanding sort of how these are not 1920s wood windows, these are 2015 wood windows. So I think the delta between the existing wood window and the proposed steel window actually will be quite modest.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to add, sorry, that the existing wood trim that is on top and bottom of the window, at the existing on the left, we are maintaining that or replacing that on the top as well, so that the aesthetic appearance of the frame of the window, as the window as it meets the brick, is going to be identical to the existing window.
And it will be wood. So this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other question that I had deals with the mechanical equipment, and you said whether it was from the southwest or any of the visibility would be very small. How do you define that? If we're standing on Madison,
right,
at what point does that visibility line stop?
So I just run, so there's a tiny bit of visibility here, but when you stand across the street, there is none. And then similar on 63rd Street, This is, I don't know if we would characterize this as minimal or not, but this is pretty limited. This is just the front edge of this enclosure. And remembering this, pretty much all the air conditioning is handled by this unit for the entire complex, almost, 40,000 square feet. As you move up, again, I'm not sure, this seems pretty modest or minimal. As you get to 64th Street, there is more visibility for sure. But then I think you start seeing this sort of in the context of the city beyond. So it has less of an effect on the building. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good.
That's it, Jane.
Thank you, Gail.
Next would be Michelle Birnbaum. Michelle? I lost Michelle. There she is.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Can you tell me how much where you say when you get to 64th Street and you see the most, that's the point where it's most visible. How many feet or inches is actually visible above the roof line or above the fencing?
So in other words, how much of this are you seeing basically?
Yeah. Is that 3 feet, 7 feet? What is that?
I don't know, Michelle, how would you say that's about 6 feet?
It's about half of the size of the unit, and the unit is about a total of 12 feet or 11'6". So I would say it's about half of that.
So we'd be looking at about 6 feet above the fencing.
Well, if I may add, is that the further back you move up on Madison Avenue, the more the building behind the 702, 704 would become apparent. And there is a wall just adjacent to our air conditioning unit. You can see in the axonometry of the yellow box there, just next to that unit, there's an existing building that is taller than our.
That's this.
Yeah, but
yes.
I'm talking about when you're going north.
Right. So you'll see that piece.
Yes.
Here. This is the beginning.
You will start seeing that building.
Yeah, but I think as you get north, what happens is you'll see a little bit more, but eventually this line will eclipse the building. So
yes, that is true.
So at its maximum, what are you looking at? About 8 feet as opposed to 6?
Yes, I would say so.
At about 8
yes.
feet. Okay.
Yes.
Also, you're talking about awnings on the first and second floor. Can you tell me the dimensions of them, what kind they are and what fabric, what color?
Sure. So they're just a fabric. They're a fabric awning. Let me go to the awning details. It's called natural. It's can you see this color? It's a
yeah.
Okay. So it's just a sort of a beige with a simple logo on the flap. These are detailed as unframed valances, so they'll be loose. They'll have some motion to them, and the logo it's called out at 4.25 inches in height.
But they're not retractable.
No, they're not.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the issues with the retractable awnings is that the housing to hold the retractable
is bigger.
Gets huge. So these are you can see how slender these are. They're just simple painted metal.
So on the facades of the building, can you just go back to the rendering where we see how many windows there are on both the Madison Avenue and the 63rd Street side? Because, okay, so now if you're starting from the southernmost building, the one south of the bank, and you're going to have awnings on that building, plus the bank building, and around the side of the bank building, and onto the new building on 63rd Street.
There are no awnings on 63rd.
Oh, not even on the bank
new
building?
Yes,
on
on
the
the
new
bank
building, but
building,
there is
yes.
on the bank building.
Right.
So that's counting about 2, 4, 6 or so there, 7, 8, 9, and then there's about another 5. So you got about 13 or 14 windows on the second floor.
5, 8.
And if each of them are going to have awnings and each of them is going to have a logo as well?
Yes, that's what's proposed. Yep.
I mean, I love awnings, but I'm just thinking that's an awful lot of awning and an awful lot of logo. How deep is that awning again from the end to the brick?
Sorry, I don't remember that number, but 3'2".
3 feet. All right, and there are no sides on them. And
No.
you're having it on the first floor as well, correct? Awnings on the first floor as well?
No.
No, none.
Oh, just the second floor?
Yes.
Okay, nothing on the first floor. All right, one other question. When we go to the windows on the first floor that you're replacing to become steel, they are remaining multi-light. What are they, 6/6 or 8/8?
They're 12/12.
Oh, 12/12, but
Yeah.
you're keeping that, is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You're keeping that. Okay, I think that's probably it. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, I know, excuse me, one more thing. I happen to agree about the bank sign, although I recognize that you're not destroying it, but you're putting the Hermes sign on top of it. If it's feasible, when I looked at the overlay, the Hermes sign looked as though it was a different shape, a different dimension than the bank one. Like if you look at the Hermes, it looks less elongated. You know, the horizontal measure looks smaller than the Bank of New York horizontal measure. Is that true?
Yes, that would be true. And the Hermes logo is consistent throughout their branding.
Right. So
It
then
is.
how do you cover the Bank of New York sign with that?
Because
you cover
there is a new piece of marble that is placed in front of the
I'll zoom in on
the
this.
existing sign.
So you're gonna cover it and then put the new one on top of it.
Yes.
Is there any way you can move that Bank of New York? I understand you want your logo above your front door. That makes sense, but it's such a wonderful historic sign. Is there any room above it? Is there any room on the side? If you go to the full front picture, we can see what the distance is from the Bank of New York sign to the first floor window.
Yeah, I mean, there's
You have,
there's really there's sort of no room. I mean, it's
I
proportioned.
see.
It's proportionate. The other thing I will say, having worked on with marble material in New York City, is that marble is not a very good building material for the city. And while it's it's only 100 years old, the idea of removing this, and it's unclear how it's built, but removing this, I would be afraid that it would actually fracture. But I think what we're proposing is not eliminating this sign. I think the team actually talked quite a bit about this, and we all felt it was important to keep it. And perhaps someday Hermes won't be there. I don't know that the Bank of New York would come back, but that sign will always be there. And that's important, I think, as a sort of holding.
I appreciate that, but of course no one will know, but it will be there. I was trying to figure out a way for somebody to know and actually see it. So if you can examine that anywhere else on the building, I would appreciate that. Also, I mean, it won't change my vote on the project, but I would like to see that happen. And also about the flagpole, I feel a little differently than some others. I would like to see you keep it. I think everybody recognizes it as a flagpole. Everybody recognizes that at one time or another, there may or may not have been a flag there. And I think it belongs on the building, and I think it would be a shame for you to remove it.
Is that it, Michelle?
Yes, it is. Do you have any thoughts about that?
They want to remove it, Michelle. The application is to remove it.
I understand. I'm asking for some input on a reconsideration. Kaz, you have any comments?
Oh, sorry. I thought Michelle was going to answer that. It's really somewhat anybody. This is a preference, I think, on the part of our clients. So we can speak to them about that. But I think at the moment the proposal is to eliminate it.
Thank you.
Well, we can go. Thank you, Michelle. We can go to the next board member.
And that is our board chair, Alita Camp.
Thank you. Well, first, I know Paige Cowley. I've had dinner with her, so just as a, I don't even know if that's a disclosure. Second, I would expect Hermes to do something refined and elegant, and they certainly did. I like it. I really like the doors as well, and I understand about the windows. A little while ago, there was an application, and I don't remember if it was this building or one further north, where they put snow removal into the sidewalk. Do you
This
remember?
is the building. This is the building with the snow removal in the sidewalk.
The snow melt?
Snow melt,
Yes.
right? So you'll be dealing with all of that maintenance, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then I do think it's a little bit visible from 64th Street. It's hard for me to judge about it blending into the skyline. And I trust that you would pick as neutral, whether it's gray or something else that just blends in somehow to the building that it's next to. And I also agree, I have to say, with the idea of some kind of historic plaque. I like to read them when I see them. So maybe the space on 63rd Street, it looks like there's more brick. I don't know how Hermes would feel about it, but it would be a nice thing given the historic value of the building. Thank you.
Kazme, would you please go to the elevation of the 63rd Street side?
I don't mean the historic, I don't mean
Yeah.
the historic value, I meant of the building, but just of the entity itself, not the,
Yes.
not the building.
There is a sign over the 63rd Street door that we were planning to keep.
Good point. Thank you. So this entry here, let me see if I have a better, I can zoom in here. Sorry. Give me just a moment while my computer freezes. It's hard to see in this, but this also has the same signage, yes?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're not changing that and putting.
We're not changing that one.
Okay. So then for me, that would work. I still like historic plaques, but I appreciate that you're keeping that. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. And we understand the need for maintaining it. And that's why we, as Kaz mentioned, we plan on leaving the existing one within the wall and putting our new one in front of it.
And on the Madison side, you're leaving
Yes.
the 63rd
Yes.
side to say Bank of New York. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Alita.
Thank you.
So after Alita is Anthony.
All right. And 4 things in no particular order. The flagpole, unless I misremember, does not appear in the 1939-40 tax photos, so it is a relatively new addition, and I think it's fine to lose it. I think it would. I think having the sign, excuse me, on the side street is perfectly appropriate, and maybe that makes the whole issue go away. I think that leaving doing something with the existing sign in front would only mar the original design, which adding a piece of marble over it really doesn't. I do have, I think the visibility of the mechanical equipment might be upsetting for a week or two, but is not, I think, not significant, and certainly has nothing to do with the real historic building, the bank. And then finally, a question, are the new windows fixed? Sort of like fake 1/1s, 12/12s?
Right. I think they can be operable, but I don't think they will be operated. Is that right, Michelle?
Okay, because they.
Correct. For air conditioning purposes, we don't need them.
No, I understand that. I mean, it was actually a question, curiosity. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may just read the sign on 63rd Street, it does have some signage over it and the text. Kaz, I emailed you the image also, and this is what it says. This building was erected by the New York Life Insurance and Trust Company AD 1922. That is what the 63rd Street sign says. So I suspect
Perfect.
that the Madison Avenue sign was altered to say Bank of New York rather than New York Trust.
And actually, we've done some research. The bank and the trust company actually merged in 1922. So that explains the two different signs and the information.
Thank you. Will, who comes after Anthony?
Marco. Marco?
Oh, wow, good.
I think it's Sarah Chu, no? I'm sorry. But
No, Sarah's not here today.
okay, thank you. Well, in general terms, the application is fine. I don't think it has something. How many tons is the unit?
100 tons.
100 tons. Okay, thank you. The situation what made me call my attention is the entrance door. If you see the entrance on Madison Avenue, you're replacing or glass to keep transparency for your business. But on the 63rd Street, you maintain the consistency of the black door, which is basically, I think that's the right thing to do it. But that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, that part only. The rest is pretty much, you did a very good job. I cannot say anything more about except that part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Will?
After Marco is Christina Davis. Christina?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for this beautiful renovation and your contribution to the elegance of Madison Avenue. We really appreciate it. And for those on the committee, possibly will understand the importance of the security of Hermes. If they didn't see it on the news, they should look on YouTube for the incredible vandalism against their building. And the group of people and the one young man who had a crowbar, it appeared to be, who kept beating at their window, would walk away and came back again and again. It's the most extraordinary thing. So one can fully understand, unfortunately, the necessity for their security and their attention to it. And I'm delighted too that you're moving to a bigger space. I love shopping there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
And finally, Kimberly Selway.
Hi, thank you, Will. Thank you, Jane. The one question I have, overall, I'm in favor of this presentation, and I echo most of the comments that my colleagues have made. The last page that you showed that had the full rendering, maybe it's my lack of understanding, but does it reflect that metal addition you were going to add to the railing on top, or is that simply not visible at all from this perspective?
I think it's imperceptible from this perspective. It's inboard and it's dark. I don't think you'd notice it from this perspective. Okay. It's only 6 inches taller than this, so at this close in, I don't think you'd see it.
It looks like the light blue that's reflected there in between.
I'm not sure. Well, the railing is going to be painted black. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering my question. Okay. Nothing else, Jane.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Is that everyone, Will?
That is,
except
yeah.
for me and David. Well, I want to speak to, I'm going to even go for the metal windows, but I cannot go for the covering up of the original Bank of New York sign. How many windows are there along Madison that will have awnings at the 2nd floor and along 63rd Street? How many awnings? And there's signage also on the adjacent building on Madison. There's the logo that will be on every single awning. The logo is going to be on the new transparent glass doors with the beveled glass. That Bank of New York sign, there are plenty of buildings, old buildings reused for other purposes that have the original signage and just keep it, the discrete original signage. I just cannot support covering up that Bank of New York sign, given the history of that bank, Alexander Hamilton, and the beauty of Madison Avenue. And as Alita aptly said, everyone is kind of interested in what these buildings used to be. So that's my only comment, and I'll defer to David now.
I'll just quickly pick up the ones before I get to the sign. I think the awnings are okay. I think the repetition is fine. It's decorative, and I have no problem with them. I could remove the flagpole, as Anthony explained. I don't see any reason for it, and a flagpole without a flag on it, I think, is a mistake. I'd like the mechanical to be a little bit less, but I think, as Cass pointed out, eventually we'll just get used to it. Unless it was Michelle who said 2 weeks, so 2 weeks and we won't notice it. You bring up a good point about the sign. I keep thinking about the sign, and I probably won't have a decision until it's time to vote. But let me say this, it would be nice to keep the sign, but it wouldn't preclude my voting in favor of the project if the sign is covered, since we do have the other sign. And so
This other side's a secondary elevation.
no, I understand that it's a secondary
I
elevation.
know.
But the other side of the coin is, no matter how you cut the cake, this is now Hermes, and it's not the Bank of New York anymore. So yes, it would be nice to keep it, but I don't feel, Jane, as strongly as you do, that, you know, for me, it's covering the sign is okay. If Hermes was happy with leaving the Bank of New York, that would be nice, but I'm not going to vote against it because they're covering the sign.
I have one last question of the applicant. On that north-facing side where the visibility of the mechanicals is more apparent, is it, I know Michelle raised the issue, is it 6 feet or 8 feet above the roof line when it's at its most visible?
I think we're estimating 8 feet.
Okay.
Yep.
That was my question. I'm not going to fight City Hall on the signage. I think Hermes is so well known all over the world, everywhere. I certainly feel that people would know it was Hermes without the Hermes sign above the door. So I'm going to have to abstain on this application. But I think it's a move to approve. Can we have somebody introduce a resolution?
Alita has her hand up.
Actually, it's not to formulate a resolution, but to ask, since there seems to be a lot of sentiment about the sign, if we could have it be separate from the rest of the application to preserve the original sign. As
I'm
David-
happy to do that, Alita.
Thank you.
So we're going to divide the resolution into 2 parts. It's all the work to be done that's outlined in the application, except for the signage above the door, the existing signage to be replaced or to be covered over. Does anybody want to introduce a resolution?
I'll introduce the resolution to approve the building with the exception of the sign.
Second.
So I think we can call the roll, Will.
Okay, give me 1 second to get the vote sheet up so everybody can see it. I'm gonna quickly go through and unmute everybody. So as I do, please just confirm it and then I'll read the roll.
Yes,
Elizabeth Ashby,
yes,
thank you. Gail Barron,
Yes.
Michelle is probably still muted. Michelle?
Yes, you just unmuted me. Yeah, this is on the first part. You're talking about this is an approval for the whole project with the exception of the sign?
Yes.
Is that what? Yes, okay, yes.
Okay. Alita?
Yes.
Thank you. Anthony?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Marco?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
And Kim?
Yes.
Okay. Unanimous.
Thank you. Well, now we can move to the second part, which is the signage. Does anybody want to introduce a resolution about that? David, how about you?
Resolved that the Bank of East Asia sign remain visible and not be covered.
Is there a second?
Second. Second.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go back down the roll. Sorry. This is for item 1, disapproval of signage.
It's, okay, I guess you could put it that way. It's that,
Sorry.
the applicant retains the original signage.
Visible.
Okay. Elizabeth?
The original sign over the main entrance.
It's not a matter of retaining it, it's a matter of keeping it visible. Is that in the resolution?
Yeah, retaining visibly original signage.
Okay, visible, right.
Yeah, on Madison
The
Avenue.
original sign over the main entrance.
No.
This is just for our
Thank
internal
you, David.
records.
We'll clarify it, but it's yes, thank you, David.
So Elizabeth,
Yes,
thank you. Gail,
Yes,
Jane, sorry, Michelle,
Yes,
Alita,
Yes.
Anthony,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Jane,
Yes,
Marco,
Yes.
Christina,
no,
and Kimberly.
Yes.
Who may have muted herself again. Give me 1 second. Kimberly.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Now you can remute yourselves. We're done with this item, I believe. That's for Jane and David to decide.
thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the applicant for a lovely presentation. Now we can move along to item 2.
I'm just going to remute everybody for a second, and then I'll find the applicants for item 2.
No.
All right, the applicant is being represented by Brian Connolly.
Correct. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. David, you'll have to unmute as well. Okay, I hear you right now, David. Push the button at the bottom of your screen to confirm.
Can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
Yes.
Do you want to read this or do you want me to read it?
I'm very happy to let you read it, but if you want me to, I do not mind.
No, I don't mind reading it. 1083 Fifth Avenue, between 89th and 90th Streets, expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. Jeffrey R. Ogden Codman LLC, Brian J. Connolly, architect. Beaux-Arts style townhouse designed by Turner and Killian and built in 1901-02 with significant alterations by Ogden Codman in 1913-15. Application to install a low wall and railing at the front of the building. So we're ready for your presentation.
I just would, could you just confirm you're seeing the shared screen at this moment?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So my name is Brian Connolly. I'm the architect of record for the property at 1083 Fifth Avenue. The proposal is for the creation of a new limestone wall and railing with the view to creating a typical transition zone that you would normally find between the public realm of the sidewalk and the private realm of a home in a Manhattan townhouse typology. In addition, we're applying to the Department of Transport to replace a defective and discordant sidewalk. In the course of this presentation, we're going to walk you through several examples of this type of feature in front of townhouses on Fifth Avenue and in the immediate neighborhood. And we're also going to sort of show how the proposed encroachment onto the sidewalk is significantly less than we're seeing in many other adjacent townhouse properties on Fifth Avenue. I'd just like to mention briefly about the format. We initially submitted this to the Department of Transportation. The first few sheets are in the required sequence that DOT requires. They asked us to take the project to Landmarks, who in turn asked us to take it to you. So the second group of sheets are those required for the Landmarks presentation. So I'll just ask you to bear with me if I have to toggle back and forth occasionally between the initial Department of Transport sheets and the Landmark sheets.
Are you saying that DOT has accepted this?
DOT did not give us any comments. They said that the first step was to determine whether Landmarks would find it acceptable. Ultimately, we need both. It's similar to going to the DOB. The DOB. The DOB won't review things that have a zoning implication until Landmarks. In fact, Landmarks won't review things that have a zoning implication until DOB signs off. In this case, DOT wants Landmarks input on it first. And keep in mind that DOT will give any approval only under revocable consent. So even if they approve it, they could ask for it to be removed at some future date. So at this point, they're merely looking for aesthetic input from the two Landmarks agencies. So I just want to say a few words about the typology of Manhattan townhouses. As I mentioned earlier, typically they have a transition zone in front, and that's often in the form of several steps. In some cases, it's a full-blown stoop. In other instances, it's a low wall and or railings. Certainly planting is common. In some cases, it's a combination of some or all of those things. But there's typically a transition zone that allows some sort of sense of security and some graduated phasing from the public to the private realm. This particular property had a transition zone, and I'm going to show you that on other slides. At some point, the building was converted to a carriage house, at which point they lost the transition zone to allow vehicular access. So what I'd like to do, as I said, I need to move back and forth between some slides, but if we could go to page 9, we'll see the history first. So I'm going to go to this 9th sheet. I'm just waiting for it to load. Okay. So on this page, we see the various iterations and evolution of the 1083 Fifth Avenue building. In the first photograph on the top left, 1083 is the one on the extreme left. The building on the right of that photograph is 1080. The next ones are 1081, 1082, and 1083. 1081, 82, and 83 were all built together at the same time by the same architect. All three had transition zone enclosures in the form of railings and masonry walls. They also had 3 steps up to them at that stage. The initial the first floors were originally slightly higher than the street level. And you can see a slightly better version of that in the second photograph, which I'm zooming into. You can see the railings and transition zones on all 3 of those properties. The next photograph I'm going to go over to is from about 1915. This was after Ogden Codman renovated 1083 Fifth Avenue. You can just barely see on the left of that photograph that the transition zone was eliminated at that stage. The reason that was done was that 1083 Fifth Avenue was physically connected to 3 East 89th Street. Both properties together formed an L-shaped residence with 2 distinct entrances. The owner at that time, Archer Huntington, he used the 89th Street entrance for pedestrians and visitors. He used the Fifth Avenue entrance as a carriage entrance. I'm going to move down to the tax photograph from 1940. And in this photograph, you can see the entrance as it was modified by Ogden Codman. Codman did two things at that stage. He created the wider entrance that was used for carriages at 1083 Fifth Avenue. To facilitate those carriages, he eliminated the walled enclosure in front of 1083, although you can see that they still existed on the adjoining 1082 building. The other thing Codman did was he eliminated the steps that led into 1083 because he lowered the first floor to sidewalk level to facilitate the carriage entrance. The next picture to the right of that is the building as it looks today. Archer Huntington deeded the buildings to the National Academy of Design, who've been using it, who had used it for several decades until about 2 years ago when they sold all three of the properties in this area. During the National Academy of Design's residency in the building, they modified the first floor. In particular, they sort of changed it to a commercial storefront. There's a metal and glass storefront, and they also dropped the windows on the left and right side. The nature of this proposal is to turn 1083 back into a single family residence. That work is currently underway on site with DOB and Landmarks approval. This is the first application we're making for work to the exterior of the building, hence we're coming before your organization. But 1083 is no longer connected to 3 East 89. They're both now separate properties. So it's important to restore this building to one that has a dignified residential entrance rather than the commercial entrance that's there now. Part of the work we're proposing is to change the doors out to replicate the historic doors that were on 1083 when Ogden Codman redesigned the building. We found those drawings at Avery Library, and the intention is to replicate those wood doors. The wood door application is a separate application. It's not part of this particular work. But the other component of restoring this building to a residential quality is to give it the transition zone that residential buildings typically had in Manhattan and typically have today. I'm going to go on now to go back to page 1. And we'll largely go through the drawings in sequence from here. Just waiting for the image, okay. So as I pointed out, the building today has a commercial entrance and it no longer has the transition zone. If you see in the middle photograph on the right, you'll see a planter on the adjacent co-op building, 1080 Fifth Avenue. The two lower photographs show the adjacent planter on 1080 Fifth Avenue from 2 angles. We're mentioning that for a couple of reasons, is because we're using the projection of the 1080 planter as a starting point for some of the work that we want to do. I'm going to move to page 3. And page 3 shows the existing conditions on the sidewalk in front of 1083. The sidewalk is 25 feet wide. It's currently free of obstructions except for a security lamppost down here in the lower left-hand corner. But for the most part, the full 25 feet is there except for the projecting bow front of the facade, which is an allowable encroachment onto the sidewalk. It's been grandfathered since the building was built. I want to draw your attention in particular to this shaded area where my cursor is, and that's the footprint of the cellar space and vault below the street. We believe that's also the location where the original transition zone, low wall steps and railings occurred, and that they rested directly on that. And that dimension for that vault space below and the presumed dimension of the transition zone above is reasonably consistent with other buildings nearby. I'm going to go to page 4. And page 4 shows what we're proposing. The new proposed work is in red. So you can see that what we did is, if you look at my cursor, we took the projection of the planter at the adjoining Co-op 280. We moved across and used that roughly as our starting point for the new enclosed area. Then we offset that 7 feet 8 inches off the existing curve and returned this back to the wall. We did that for a number of reasons. We felt that if we came out to this line here, where my cursor is, that's where the old railing was. We felt that an encroachment that size, standing on its own, would seem intrusive. It worked fine when it was part of a series of row houses, as happens further down Fifth Avenue, where there's multiple houses with encroachments that align. We felt in this isolated condition, going out that far would seem unusual, and it would seem like more of an intrusion. So we set it back to the next pavement line where my cursor is now. And then to ease the rectangular-like effect of it, we followed a curve of the building that brought us back to the level of the adjoining planter. So the encroachment appears relatively minimal in plan, and that's done by the curved shape rather than a rectangular shape. And it's also done by setting back approximately 1 full paving pattern from where we believe it was before. The other thing we did in terms of design is we maintained the height of the railing quite low. So walking down Fifth Avenue or up Fifth Avenue in the vicinity of this building, you are for the most part still looking over the proposed features of the transition wall. And that's much lower than some of the larger railings and defining zones around Marymount College, for example, and a number of other buildings in the area which still have their walls and railings.
What's the height, please?
The height of the stone, I can show you a more detailed drawing as we go through this, but to the height of the top of the limestone is about 30 inches. And then there's approximately another 11 inches on top of that. But keep in mind that between the 30 inches and the railing on top, it's transparent. So the metal railing feature on the top is quite light, and you can see between it and the limestone below. And then the obscure, opaque portion in limestone is about 30 inches high, which is a little lower than a conference table, which is about 32. The other thing we're doing here is we're proposing that there would be loose planters behind the railing. And the reason we're doing them loose is that we don't want to physically do anything hard up against the original Codman elevation. If Department of Transport approved the encroachment, it'll be done under revocable consent, in which point the owner would have to remove it. So we don't want to leave any scars on the landmark building at the moment. And we don't want to put in physical planters that might have soil up against the building. If you look down at the plan, just where my cursor is, you'll see that the proposed new wall doesn't physically touch the building. There's a small gap of a few inches away from that. So if it was ever removed, it won't leave any marks on the limestone, or sorry, the granite water table at the base of 1083 right now. I'd like to go to page 5. And page 5, I'm going to zoom out. That shows you the view that we've been talking about. You can see that the proposed low wall is lower than the windows of the building. The railing gives some additional height, but it doesn't add a lot of visual bulk to it. And the way the design is curved eases the apparent projection in front of the doors, which is the further point. It eases it back towards the 2 adjoining buildings, so to achieve 2 things. One is to be a good sibling to the curvature of the building itself, but also, more importantly, to minimize the apparent physical impact on the street. I'm going to go through a couple of pictures on the next page, and mainly these were done for Department of Transport requirements to sort of show comparable installations and how much of the street remains available. And what you're going to see in these photographs coming up is the degree of free sidewalk on the neighboring buildings. In many cases, in a few cases, I should say, it goes down as low as about 4'6" in one place. It's commonly around 11 or 12 feet In a few cases, it's larger. In a couple of cases, it's smaller. What we're proposing to do is leave a minimum of 15 feet in front of the proposed low wall. So even looking at these pictures here, Cooper Hewitt, which is on the next block, the sidewalk averages around 10 feet, and there's a couple of locations where it goes down to 7, where there's light fixtures. The adjoining building at 1080 Fifth Avenue, there's, in some points, it's choked down to 12.5 feet. If we move down further down Fifth Avenue and at 87th Street, we can see there's instances of 12 feet, 15 feet. I'm going to move on to the next page. These are showing a number of instances where there's choke downs as little as 11, 9'10", 8'6", 9'6", 5'9", 4'6", at one location there. We have some 8s and 9s showing up on the next page. There's a 5'9" at Marymount College. There's another 5'9" further down. Moving down near the Irish American Historical Society, which we believe is one of the last fully projecting areaways encroaching that deep onto Fifth Avenue. At the planter, that goes down to 5'9". At the sidewalk, it's 9'8", as you can see in the lower left picture. So going back to my drawing, bear with me. We're proposing leaving 15 feet at the apex of this curve here, and we're going to have 1710 at the 2 corners. So we're generally much greater than the average of the free sidewalks further down Fifth Avenue, as you saw in those pictures. If I go on here now to the details of the railing and low wall, we're proposing replacing the golden ochre colored sidewalk that was put in, we believe sometimes around the 40s and 50s. I'm not sure whether that falls under your purview, but we're intending to restore the sidewalk to a color that closely matches the sidewalk on either side and get rid of that aberration of the pattern in the on a Fifth Avenue sidewalk. And then here you can see close-up details of how the wall is proposed to be built. It's going to be solid limestone, obviously assembled in multiple pieces, but it's going to be cut limestone, not a veneer. The globes that appear at the end of each section would be solid limestone. And where my cursor is, we're proposing a brass railing in between. We've looked at these pictures on the next page before. And then finally on this last page here, these are a number of precedents that we identified in the immediate neighborhood. The majority of them are actually on Fifth Avenue, but some are on the side streets. In the first picture I'm showing here, 991 Fifth Avenue, that's the Irish American Historical Society. We believe from Sanborn maps that that's the original sidewalk encroachment, which came out quite far. You can also see the pattern here of using low walls with a short railing on top and curvature of walls. In this case, it's a convex curve, sorry, a concave curve against a convex building facade. We're proposing a convex wall against a convex facade. The next picture over is also 991 Fifth Avenue, the Irish American Historical Society, and you can see how far the encroachment is into the sidewalk. We're looking to do an encroachment less than 2/3 of what we're seeing at the Irish American Historical Society. 973 Fifth Avenue is one of the, it's the building beside the French Cultural Institute. They are also out about 12 feet into the sidewalk. Moving down onto the next row of slides here, we're just demonstrating a number of precedents in the area where curved steps, low masonry walls, with low railings atop are used. In some cases over here on the right, you'll see there was a low wall that had a low stone balustrade, but you'll see curvature of steps in front of a curvature on a facade. Moving down to the next row of photographs, Again, low walls, plantings behind them, panelized design in the low wall over on the left. The middle photograph, this next pair of photographs, again, a low wall, a panelized limestone construction. The next one over on the right, a low wall with a panelized limestone design, curved steps. The last tier here, low walls with plantings behind them. The last two are on Fifth Avenue where there's low walls with low railings and plantings. So again, the idea is to do something that recalls the features in the neighborhood, that restores a feature that was originally on a townhouse in this area and brings back the transition element that you expect between the public realm and the private realm in a Manhattan townhouse. I'd just like to add also that we worked through a number of iterations with staff at Landmarks and also with the Director of Preservation, Jared Knowles, who took a particular interest in the project. The version we're showing to you is the one that we concluded our work with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. They have said that they intend to support it at the public hearing before the commissioners. And we're looking for your feedback at this point. I separately had submitted a letter of testimony from the architectural historian, Francis Moroni, who wrote a note to say that in his opinion also the importance of a transition zone between the public and public and private realms is an essential feature of a residential townhouse in Manhattan. We are restoring this from commercial use back to single family residential use, and we believe the proposed addition is appropriate for those reasons.
Thank you for very thorough presentation. Let's see if there's anyone from the public who would like to comment.
If you are wanting to comment on this, please raise your hand through the participants feature located at the bottom of your screen, or press *9 if you are on the telephone. Give it 3 more seconds. And it appears there's not anyone from the public who would like to speak to this. I actually, really quickly, Lo, were you trying to wave me down for this? No, okay.
Okay, so let's go to the committee. Let's do it in reverse order this time.
All right, we will start with Marco Tamayo. And you want to do the public or the public members afterwards, right? Marco?
What's the question?
Hello?
Sorry, alphabetical order, starting with the regular members and then public members afterwards.
Oh, yes, and then the public members afterwards. Yes, thank you.
Marco?
Yes. I think the application and the proposal is very nice, well done, very thoughtful. Wow, it was. I wish that I can see more drawings rather than the way that the applicant expressed verbally. But both was great. The only comment that I have in this application is the encroachment of the sidewalk. You compare with some encroachment, and correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes most of them, the transition zone, all of them have stairs. In your case, you don't. But to enhance with this transition area, I think it looks nicer, beautiful, but it's too intrusive with the sidewalk. That's the only part that I found that is my comment. The rest is perfectly fine. Thank you.
After Marco, we have Anthony. Give me 1 second, Anthony.
Hi, I am in fact unalterably opposed to this proposal for any one of a number of reasons, all of which I will happily enumerate. And I'm sorry if I'm going to take up a lot of time. First of all, I do not believe that what has become part of the public way should be removed from the public way in order to benefit a single householder. That's just sort of a basic thing. Second of all, while I am sure that Mr. Connolly and his team made very thorough and complete investigations, I am absolutely not convinced that this entrance was a carriage entrance when Ogden Codman redesigned this house. The house around the corner on 89th Street clearly has a carriage entrance, was always intended to be a kind of subsidiary space to this house on Fifth Avenue. It kind of surprises me beyond my ability to accept it, frankly, that this was converted to a carriage entrance, which meant in effect that there was no pedestrian entrance to this house from the period of 1913 until it was converted to the use of the American Academy. Furthermore, one of the reasons for the projecting fences and areaways of all of these individual townhouses, including and maybe even especially pertinent, the Irish American Historical Society, which is by the same original architects, was the existence of an areaway and stairway separate entrance down directly to what we would call the cellar. That no longer exists, has not existed as far as I can tell, since Ogden Codman redesigned the facade of this building, which is to say the functional purpose for extending the private property as far as possible no longer exists and hasn't existed for a century. And finally, and this is about the sort of carriage house thing, the 1939 tax photos, which predate shortly, admittedly, predate the transition from private residence to American Academy, show no curb cut on Fifth Avenue and show a curb cut in front of 3 East 89th Street. So it seems to me that there is something not quite right here about the entire argument. And I just think this is the wrong thing to do. Having said that, it's a lovely presentation. It's just you're asking us to approve something that is the wrong thing to do. Thank you.
Can I interject just on the carriage house?
You may interject for the moment, yes.
We have the original, we have copies of the original Ogden Codman drawings from the Avery Library, and I can share those. I can't share them with you right now, but I'm happy to share them with you afterwards. I don't have access to them right now, but they clearly show that the space inside was labeled carriageway, and the pair of doors were specially designed to fold, not only to open through 90 degrees, but to fold back against the 2 interior walls, so that there was no projecting jamb to maximize the area for a carriage to come through. But the plans specifically call for it as a carriage house, and Codman lowered the floor specifically with the intent of being able to get a carriage in, because the prior to the Codman design, the entry level was about 3 steps up. So both in the Codman cross section and the Codman floor plan and the names that are actually used on the Codman drawings in the library, it's called carriage house. And there's an internal curb that he designed around to, I guess they could hose the carriages down inside without the water flowing further back onto the first floor.
We don't need a lengthy.
Okay, David, if I may,
Let me run it, Anthony, please.
Okay, sorry.
You can come back in a second. I only wanted to say that we don't need a lengthy interior description. You know, we trust you as a professional that if you say those drawings labeled it Carriage way that it was. But I will ask whether his section actually went out to the street and showed a curb cut or not.
I would have to look at that right now.
Anthony?
I'm perfectly happy to stand corrected. Obviously, this was a particular interest of Mr. Huntington, that all of his residences be approached by carriage, and that's fine. It's still the wrong thing to do to take away from the public way. Thank you.
Thank you. As much as possible, we don't want to have discussion. We want to have comments. But thank you both. Next.
Next up would be Alita Camp. One second, Alita.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, I agree with Anthony. To me, let's not call it a transition space. And I know this is more an issue for the Transportation Committee. It's more of a moat of removing oneself from the public way to the privacy and serenity of a house, which does nothing for the public. Even the design, and it would be beautiful if it were someplace else, suggests arms enfolding a house and closing off the public. Arguably, all of the other spaces you referenced are about beautifying the street, or it's another entity that is no longer a private house. There somehow is a division between a private home that is separating itself to such an extent from the public. What is it, about 7 feet, 10 feet roughly that you're taking up, right? That's
7 feet 8.
Okay, so even closer to 8 feet. That's a pretty large space. That's 1/3 of the sidewalk for nothing other than to provide the family some additional privacy and a way to remove themselves from the public on a crowded avenue, a crowded part of Fifth Avenue, because it's right next to a whole bunch of museums. So I don't like the design because of the suggestion that it is very, very closed off, other than the other buildings. And I had to look, because of the way this works, I had to look at my own, the materials on the website rather than what you were showing, but they look like the walls are spreading out to allow those convex stairs, and yours is enclosing the space. There's no, for me, there's no public beauty in this. There's no public serenity. It is entirely a way for the public, for the owner of the house to remove itself. And I disagree with it on the nature of the public versus the private right of way, as well as on the design. It's just very closed off, and I'm having a trouble just separating it. It just does not seem appropriate on that basis. But thank you for obviously well documented buildings in the neighborhood. Thank you, David.
Well,
next is Michelle. Sorry, I had muted myself. Michelle?
Okay. Yeah, now it, okay, thank you very much. Can you tell me where the property line is here?
Yes, let me go back a couple of drawings. Okay. This heavy dashed line here is the property line. The neighboring building meets the property line.
No, just on your property. Just your property. That's the property line.
Correct, yes, that dashed line.
So already, the gray that you have is already past the property line, and now you're coming out almost 7 feet. Now, when these come to us at our transportation committee, of which I'm a member, I traditionally turn this down when it comes as an irrevocable trust, and I am pretty much usually most of the time, close to all of the time, but of course there's always extenuating circumstances, so I won't say that. But I'm opposed to extending beyond the property line. I see no reason for a private owner to take public space for their own benefit. It serves the community not at all. Now, I think that it's very attractive what you've done. I think it's really beautiful, but it's on somebody else's land. It's on public space. So I would just oppose it for that reason. The other question I have is the sidewalk. Now, you say that you're going to beautify the sidewalk, or I know there are probably cracks that you're going to correct or fix or whatever, but I thought that the DOT had recommendations or requirements that the slabs had to be what, 5x5s, or that I'm not quite sure what they are, but are you repairing them in keeping with the DOT?
Michelle, the sidewalk is not part of.
I thought it was.
Sidewalk, is the sidewalk part of your landmarks presentation?
The sidewalk is part of the landmarks presentation and DOT presentation.
Okay, I thought it was DOT, not landmarks. Sorry.
No, I understood it to be landmarks. So that is my question. Who's
landmarks.
determining this?
It is landmarks.
So who is determining the aesthetics here? My understanding is that there are requirements, that the slab has to be a certain size, and what's the requirement here? What exactly are you doing, and who's okaying it? Who's proposing it? Will it be different from the sidewalk in front of the buildings on either side of this one?
No, if you look at this drawing here, what we did is we surveyed the grid pattern on either side of it. Our lines are the red ones, and you can see that they align with the black lines either on the 1080 condo and the church side. So there was the grid that runs through at the moment. If I go back to the previous drawing, the same grid runs through both properties right now, and the intention is to rerun the same grid through again. We're not changing the subdivision of the sidewalk.
That's the grid. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that a 5x5 was what was required, what mandated. But aside from that, what about the pattern in the cement? Are you maintaining what's on the rest of the block? Are you keeping it all uniform?
Correct. If I go back to I think it's one of the last sheets, bear with me. The intention is to restore it to, if you look at the lower picture here, the adjoining building has a typical gray sidewalk. In front of 1083, at some point, they put a golden colored sand or tiny pebbles in it. Over time, if you look at this photograph, some sections of that were replaced and they didn't even match. So there's even mismatching within the 1083 sidewalk itself. The structure below it wasn't maintained. The steel rusted, causing cracks and fractures. So the sidewalk is being replaced for structural reasons over the vault and for color reasons out to the street. You can see in these photographs, I'll scroll through them.
Is that what the whole block is, that gray color? Is that the whole block?
On either side of this, yes, and that's the whole block on between 89th and 19th Street are gray concrete.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
After Michelle is Gail Barron.
Thank you. I know that you did a lot of research. I happen to have tremendous concern about not only the design, but the encroachment onto the public way. I live a block and a half away. This particular block is between Cooper Hewitt and the Guggenheim Museum. And normally, non-pandemic time, it is always extremely crowded. Even though 1080 is not a particularly attractive co-op, the structure is such that it doesn't really happen to look as obtrusive mainly because of the curvature of your building. And the row houses no longer are there. So you have the church on one side, 1080 on the other, and yet you're coming out, you're out from your property line, as Michelle noted to begin with, you're coming out close to another 8 feet. And I understand that part of it is for security. Knowing that building, there's also a way to consider having an internal vestibule, which would create more security. But I just think that taking space away from the public just is inappropriate, and that when this building was purchased, the owner knew that, okay, here's the building. It just looks so out of place. And so many of the other examples that you've shown have been in place. I've lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years. They've been there for the most part for over 50 years. So to me, this is just like something that you stick in the middle of 2 other buildings on the block. And I just don't think it's appropriate for either the location or the use. Thank you.
After Gail is Elizabeth Ashby. Hold for 1 second. Elizabeth?
Yes. Ogden Codman Jr. was one of the great architects of this period. He wrote On the Decoration of Houses with Edith Wharton. I have 3 Codman houses on my block, one of which I proposed as an individual landmark. This is very important to me. At no time does he put a fence like this in front of his buildings. You're quite right that this probably was a carriage entrance, because what he often used on his houses is that the main front door, you go in there, and then a very, on the one across the street, which he designed for himself, you go in with your carriage to the back of the driveway, and then your carriage is taken downstairs to the basement, and the main front door is on the interior. So you get the safety and the privacy on the interior of the building, as opposed to putting a fence on the outside. There is no fence like this in front of a Codman house. It is not characteristic of a Codman house. And I think that his architecture is something that we have to respect more than a great many. And I think we must turn this down. The other things are not landmarks questions. They may offend other people, but the fact of putting a fence in front of a Codman house is something that I don't think we should ever accept.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Moving on to the public members, we also have one board member who's not a member of the committee. And I do want to flag that Lo, I did see him waving during the public session, and I tried to acknowledge him. But if you want to go back to Lo at any point, let me know. But I'm going to go.
If Lo wanted to speak, he's part of the public, unless he's got a very lengthy discussion for us, which should come afterwards.
Just go to Lo now, or to go to the public members now?
Well, he has a right to speak as a public member. If we missed him, then let's just go to him.
Okay, Lo, you'll have to push a button to confirm unmuting. Towards the bottom of your screen, there will be a mute button. Just click in on that button. There you go.
Okay, great. Okay. Sorry, I'm technologically backward. Yeah, speaking, did you, I sent the office a photographic survey of Fifth Avenue frontages. are you able to just upload that and we can zip through this in 1 minute? Just 10 blocks, it's just.
Per David's request.
Well, while you're uploading, if it's going to take a little while, then we can go to the public members and then come back to Lo.
I have it up right now. So
Okay.
can you see it?
Yes, yes.
All right, Lo, we're looking forward to your photography.
Well, what I'm trying to do is to share with everybody what Fifth Avenue frontages look like. And because I think we're talking about Fifth Avenue, and we're talking about, so we're now at 96th Street looking north. The next slide is 96th Street looking south, and then we're going to walk south, okay? Even though the historic district goes another 2 blocks north. Now we're at 95th Street, and we're looking back, and this is a typical corner. This is an apartment house. Okay, next slide, please. Now we keep going. We're going from 95th. Now we're going to walk to 94th. Next slide. Okay, and here at the corner is a great mansion, Delano Aldrich. And here we see the entrance is actually on the inside of the street, but the space, part of the sidewalk is a planted garden, and that is to contribute to the public. And also you'll notice the dark wrought iron fencing, and you see that repeated. Okay, can we go to the next slide? We will continue on to, there you see the typical pattern of the way the apartment buildings and the mansions have treated Fifth Avenue. Now we continue south. Next slide. And once again, next slide, please. We're at 120. Now we're at 93rd. And okay, go forward. Oh, okay, now we're at 92nd looking back. This is the Jewish Museum. This was the Warburg Mansion. There was no garden, but they did not invade the sidewalk either. Next slide, please. This is the famous 1107 Fifth. Again, notice the very low wrought iron fencing and the beautiful gardens. Next slide, please. Now we're at the Otto Kahn Mansion, Sacred Heart School. Again, the exact same kind of pattern emerges. Next slide, please. Okay, this is unusual. Here we have a narrow sidewalk. This is the Andrew Carnegie Mansion, takes up the whole block. So we go, next slide, please. But it's a beautiful block, nevertheless. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now we're at the subject block. In the middle of the block is 1083. Here we see the Church of the Heavenly Rest. This is directly in front of Engineers Gate, and this is one of the most traversed blocks in Carnegie Hill. This is the way people, when they're jogging or taking a walk, they get to the park this way. And it's interesting that the public realm has been maintained all these years, and have been naturally contributed to by the church and by the corner apartment building and by the Ogden Codman building. So okay, so this together with the next block, which is the Guggenheim, forms a kind of a special plaza, which is really an asset to the Carnegie Hill Historic District. It isn't called as such, but it's a true asset. Next slide, please. Now we're going, this gives you a bit more detail of the Codman Mansion and how it relates to the sidewalk. Next slide. Next slide. And now you see, and now looking back, just, and we see the corner of a 1080 apartment building. Next slide. Now we're at the Guggenheim. We couldn't remove that large box. Next slide, please. We passed the Guggenheim. Next slide, please. Now we're at 88th Street. You can't see this because of the scaffolding. Next slide. But here again, and now we're looking back from 87th Street. We're looking north, and again, you see, even though there are no wrought iron fencing here, you see the planting and the very modest masonry rim. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is the last block, and these are more modern. These were built these two apartments were built in the 50s, but they continue to observe the pattern of wonderful little gardens, very low masonry, and next slide, please. And then the more metallic fences in the middle there, and here too to outline. So now we're at 86th Street, and across the street is the Metropolitan Museum Historic Districts, and we won't go there. But go to the next slide, please, and one more slide, well, and the next slide. Okay, and then the next slide, because here we see the mansion that has so often been referred to, the American Irish Historical Society, and we see why they needed to come out to the sidewalk so far, because they needed stairs to go down. But also, if you look at it, when you're in front of this building, it's very open to the public, and that to Gail's point and to Anthony's point. Okay, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Lo. That was very informative.
Thank you.
Now we're going to the public members.
Christina Davis.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have a few questions and some comments, particularly some of the buildings that Lo presented are institutions whose entrances were not on the Fifth Avenue. But I wanted to ask, how is the landmark guiding you? Because you say Jared has become very interested in this and giving you guidance. And I wanted to know what guidance they're giving you, which you said they were supporting. And then I have a couple of questions to sort of put this building in context, which I think we may have missed in some of the comments.
Sorry, you're asking me a specific question about how they.
Well, I'm just that in working with them,
Yes.
What comments have they given to you in coming up with this sort of restrained and elegant design that you have presented? Okay,
so we worked through it initially as a notion. Would they be supportive of a planted walled area in front of the building? And they were. The second step was to present some initial sketches that were slightly different from this one. And then we worked with them to fine tune the shape, the degree of projection, and the details for the materials. But in general, they were supportive of the idea of a space in front of the building that they felt added beauty not only to the building but to the street, because they felt that the building as it currently stands was somewhat denuded, that it's one of the few buildings in that area that planted area in front of it, doesn't have greenery in front of it, and doesn't have what Lo referred to as not a garden, at least a green area in front. And their feeling was that the curved shape was more appropriate than a rectangular shape, mainly because it diminished the impact of it. And if you were to look back at some of Lo's images, particularly the ones looking up and down the subject block, as I mentioned, the starting point and the end point of our curve are consistent with the depth and projection of the 7-foot planter in front of the 1080 Co-op building. So we were starting with the exact same degree of projection that's elsewhere on the same block, and just bowing it out slightly, because if we had created a straight line at that point, it would become almost tangential to the building, and that would certainly look like an error. So this was the optimum footprint that allowed a planted area and maintain some continuity of a line that was established on an adjoining property.
Yes. So here's my comments. Some of the buildings that Lowe did mention, ICP, which used to be the International Center of Photography, which now is a large private home, that entrance was always on the side street, as the Jewish Museum. And so I can understand, because in context of the building, to your left is that Heavenly Rest Cafe, which is a very noisy place, and they've spilled over with many more chairs than they're allowed. Now, temporarily, they're allowed even more because of the outside dining. But when that wasn't in effect, they were beyond what they're allowed. And
Correct.
so that's to your left. To your right is not a very attractive building, 1080. It's not one of the best buildings in the city. And you're between those two things, a cafe, a noisy cafe, and 1080. So I can understand why you had to make, and now it's not a public building anymore, it's now private. So what you're saying is we are private. And so you've built this sort of elegant curve around it to sort of single out now what it is, because it's changed its context. And so while it's a very distinguished and revered architect, I can understand why you presented what you have, because you have to single out that building now between a noisy cafe and a white building that is, not by someone it's not Ogden Codman. So I have some understanding why the landmarks is, understanding what you're trying to present. And many of the buildings have larger institutions, which this was and is no longer, and is on Fifth Avenue. So I think we have to keep it in context. Thank you.
If I could just go back to share screen, I have a photograph of the encroachment that just happened.
I'm sorry, Brian, we've really been through a lot of discussion already.
Okay.
No, he's showing the encroachment of Heavenly Rest, right?
I'm showing the Sidewalk
Cafe?
Cafe that was still
Yeah.
over.
All right, so show it. We all, I think, can envision it, but go ahead.
Can you see that now? Is it on?
No, you need to share your screen again.
Just one moment. Sorry, I'm not getting the share screen button at the top. Let me just.
At the bottom of your screen is where it should be. Green button.
Sorry, oh yeah, yes, okay, hold just one moment. Here, just bear with me one sec. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, and this is what happens, either customers move the tables over there, sometimes the wait staff do it. This was taken before the scaffolding went up recently, but it's obviously a trespass that's hard to maintain.
Thank you. I can't see it because I'm on the phone, but I certainly know what it looks like. That's why I brought it up.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, we have one more person.
Kimberly Selway. Kimberly?
Thank you. I'm going to keep this incredibly brief in the interest of time. But I echo the other comments about encroaching on public space in the sidewalk, so I can't support this application as it stands. That's it.
Jane, do you have anything to comment?
No comment.
No comment.
You do have one other board member who's here that's not a member of the committee, Billy Freeland, if you want to.
He's more than welcome to comment.
No comment.
Sorry to interrupt.
Billy, did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I did not.
Thank you. Okay. I would only say that it was a very well done presentation. When I looked at it, I struggled with it because it's a beautiful presentation, but the other side of the coin is it is encroaching. And in all deference, Christina, the fact of the matter is that if they chose to live in that house as a private house, that doesn't give them the right necessarily to encroach into the sidewalk. And I think given the Church of the Heavenly Rest, given Lowe's point about this becoming such an important public plaza in effect, those people who bought the house chose that kind of a condition. And that doesn't mean that we have to give them more privacy than they currently have. They bought the house knowing what they were going to have to live with. So as beautiful a job as Mr. Connolly did, I can't support it. So I think, Will, we're ready to, we need a resolution.
Move to disapprove. Can you hear me, Will?
Yes.
So this is a move to disapprove.
It is seconded by Gail, Anthony, and several others.
Before you take the vote, I just wanted Mr. Connolly to know that I did read Francis Moroney's letter. I have great respect for Francis Moroney, wonderful historian. Nobody knows the city better. And if he were in the context of we're talking about an existing condition, but to create a new condition is different. So I just wanted you to understand that at least I personally had given you the courtesy of reading that statement from Moroney.
Thank you.
Time to vote.
All right. We'll go down the roll, starting with Elizabeth Ashby.
Absolutely yes.
All right.
This is,
yeah. Sorry, go David.
This is a proposal to reject, disapproval. A yes is a disapproval.
Yes, a yes is a no. Gail Barron.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can only vote once, Gail.
Michelle. 1 second. Michelle.
Yes.
Thank you. Alida.
Yes.
Anthony, 1 second. Anthony? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. David?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Marco, 1 second. Marco, you may have to push the button.
You did already.
Yes, is that a yes?
Yeah, you put it already.
Oh, yes, I did. You're
That's
right.
okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Christina, I think you're still
No.
unmuted.
No.
No. And then Kimberly, are you still unmuted? No, no. Kimberly?
Yes.
And then Billy.
I'm going to abstain.
All right. That's the vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you.
So we now have a presentation on 3 East 89th Street, an informal courtesy presentation. The presenter.
Paul Kelly.
Hello?
Sorry, I didn't mute everybody back. So if I didn't mute you, please. Thank you.
Is the individual or individuals presenting 3 East 89th Street here?
I see one of them. I see Christina Pena, and then Cass was here earlier. There he is.
Okay.
And
That's not your fault. That's our fault. Oh, you're so kind.
Anthony, we hear you. Sorry about that. Cass and Christina,
Yep.
and Jim Herr,
Yes.
and Mike Orman.
Yep. I think that's everybody.
That's us.
All right. But you all are unmuted or can unmute yourselves at this point.
Okay, terrific.
Wonderful.
I think Jim is going to share the screen.
While Jim gets situated and shares his screen, I'll do just a very brief introduction. My name is Christiana Pena, and I'm here tonight with Cass Stackelberg from Higgins Quaysbarth, Jim Herr and Mike Orman from Raphael Vignoli Architects, as David indicated, to share an informational presentation for the proposal for 3 East 89th Street, which this board has reviewed in the past. It was presented at the Landmarks Commission and approved on June 30th, but tonight we'd like to walk through that presentation and answer any questions that you may have. Some individuals from this group did submit testimony to the Landmarks Commission in writing prior to that public meeting, and we did just want to express that we were really pleased to read in those comments and testimony that a number of neighbors continue to express their support for 3 East 89th Street becoming a commercial art gallery, and further for the restorative work that Jeannie's doing for this really wonderful building. As you can imagine, of course, Salon 94, Jeannie's art gallery, is facing pressures as all small businesses are confronting right now, and she's really doing her best to find creative solutions amid what continues to be a really devastating time for the arts in New York City. But while a lot of businesses are closing, moving online, or even leaving New York City altogether, Jeannie is really, her commitment and her resolve remains strong, and she's very much looking forward to being a continued part of the Carnegie Hill community, and certainly part of the city's economic and cultural recovery. So she's certainly committed to continuing to positively contribute to this neighborhood. She's been a Carnegie Hill resident for over a decade, and she's looking to reestablish her art business here in this community that she loves so much. She certainly is eager to preserve this building that I know so many of you are already familiar with, and it certainly needs a lot of TLC, and that is happening. We're very excited that she's taken on that project. And certainly she's excited to realize the goal of opening this flagship gallery right across the street from the Guggenheim, which, as we all know, is such an epicenter of contemporary arts, not only in New York City, but in the world. So with that said, I think I'll pass the mic to you, Cass, and we'll get started.
Good. Thank you, Christiana. Jim, do you want to pull up the presentation?
I thought it was on. Okay. Let's see.
So what I think we're going to do tonight, particularly given the late hour, we're going to go through the presentation that we made to Landmarks on June 30th. We'll try and do it at a measured pace to keep moving and obviously be available for questions. Jim, why don't we go to slide 3? Just as a summary slide. So this slide illustrates what we presented at the public hearing at the Landmarks Commission back in February, which feels like it was another world away. And this axonometric illustrates the overall scope of the project, including the side yard infills, the infilling at the 5th floor and the 6th floor addition, and then a section here. And as you may recall, the commissioners voted to approve the project, but without the 6th floor. And their comments at that time, in terms of the program, they sort of recognized the benefit of the atelier on the roof, and they understood how that worked with the overall program of the building. But generally speaking, in terms of design, they wanted to see something that was separate and distinct, and also was something that was a little more refined in terms of its design and obviously less visible. So since following the public hearing, the design team worked with our client to develop a rooftop scheme for the 6th floor that was smaller. It was a standalone element and would be more architecturally distinctive and distinguished. The setbacks are significant, 10 feet from this east side of the building, and then 56 feet, as you'll see shortly, from the front facade. Next slide. We talked a bit about, Christiana talked a bit about the program. It remains the same, and that is part of the modification of use that we're proposing as part of the 74-711 to allow for a commercial art gallery. You can see this is the restored exhibition space on the second floor that Jeannie has used for display. And then some other information just speaking about the way Jeannie operates her gallery. And as we've discussed, the integration and collaboration between the public and the art making process is a very key component of what this project is all about. And that's a part of this proposal as it continues. Next slide. This next slide now represents what we presented back in February and the revised proposal. So this is a one-story volume. As I mentioned, it's set back 10 feet from the east property line and 56 feet back from the front. The elevator and stair are all enclosed within this system, this volume. So it is a distinct and singular element on the roof. Obviously, the visibility is greatly reduced, and we'll share views of that with you too. Next slide. Also to point out that again, the previous proposal and the current proposal, this two-story volume at the back that was approved by the commissioners has been eliminated from the proposal. And what we presented at the public meeting a few weeks ago was a slight chamfering of this side yard infill with glazed panels to have views out to the northwest and to bring some additional daylight into this interior space. Next slide. In terms of the references for the skin of this volume on the roof, obviously this is our property here at 3 East 89th Street. From the previous application and from the many times we've been in front of you, I think you know the history of the building. This was built by Archer and Anna Hyatt Huntington as an extension, sort of an entertaining extension off of their house on Fifth Avenue, completed in 1914. It became part of the National Academy of Design complex. In 1958, the studio building or annex building was constructed. And so what we've looked at is this interesting sort of planar quality of this later 20th century insertion in the historic fabric with this diamond-shaped diapered pattern brick, and thinking about that as a reference. And then the roof of that annex building, the sort of sawtooth skylights, the angled skylights, as being a bit of a source for the articulation of the design revision. And then images across the bottom of the slide. Conservatory, the sort of geometry, the sloped skylights, and then these Victorian garden rooms also as being an inspiration in terms of the way the lattice work works as a surface treatment for these spaces. Next slide. And then finally, obviously directly across the street, the Guggenheim, another sort of unusual, to say the least, 20th century insertion in the late 19th, early 20th century historic fabric. But looking at this complex skylight up at the top of Frank Lloyd Wright's interior space for the museum, other sort of diamond-shaped reference points as being sort of glazing systems for windows and conservatories, which then obviously led Jim and Raphael to this diagrid system, which is an enclosed sort of structural system unto itself that references some of those earlier images that we just looked at, but also in a very contemporary way. Next slide. Jim.
Thanks, Cass. Jim Herr from Raphael Vanelli Architects. Thanks for having us back to show you the updates to the building. We, as Cass mentioned, we tried to push the sixth floor garden room pavilion as far back and to limit the sight lines as much as possible. There's a few components, as Cass mentioned, that were inspirations for this vocabulary of the architectural. One is this the diagrid patterning of the glazing into this more intimate scale of mullions and sashes, which we'll show you some details further down, as well as a skylight component, which basically as a conservatory working room covers the elevator override and stair bulkhead into one homogeneous object, and that unifies the simplicity of the new addition, and it also sits floats on top of the existing original penthouse of the building. And as we go through some of the view, you can see this happens to be the 89th Street view from looking from 1085th, the alleyway. Back beyond is 1083 for the rotunda. And then this is what we had in February, which was the 5th floor library, and then the 6th floor artist, the residence, and then this is the new pavilion here. And then this is a picture of with the mock-up after we did the mock-up photo, and then the scaffolding you see in the front is actually as we're doing all the survey work for the facade restoration. So we're doing all the as-built, all the conditioning and everything that's part of the restoration, measuring for the windows and all of those things. As we go further to the east on 89th Street, on the left was what we previously, the bulk in the massing that we had before. And then we've pushed it back 10 feet from the east and 56 feet from the front 89th Street facade. And then this is the railing. And the glazing is, which we'll talk a little bit further, is a low iron clear glass that's has the least amount of reflectance that we could specify. It also has is also insulated glass, and we'll show you more details of that. And then there's one slot, as we showed you in our last presentation, where the rooftop addition becomes visible here, where my cursor is, in between the Guggenheim and 1085th. And on the Fifth Avenue side, looking over the cafe of the Church of Heavenly Rest, this is what we had before. This was the previous design, and then this is the rear addition. This is the beveled side yard extension further back, and then this is the mock-up, rendered mock-up photo. And then up from the promenade, up to the reservoir, the previous view on the left, and then the pavilion here, which basically encases the bulkheads. And then this is the mock-up view that we did a few weeks ago. We have a very quick animation. So this is the view right here. You can see just the partial viewpoint of the rooftop addition in between 1085th and the Guggenheim. And as we walk north and circle around the plaza condition that Lo mentioned earlier, to the front facade of 3 East 89th Street, and then we'll just take a quick walk up to the Church of Heavenly Rest and see what that view looks like. Yeah. And then going east on 89th Street, we'll take a quick look at the alleyway between 1085th and the in the proposed pavilion there. And then we're going to walk from east to west on 89th Street from the south side of the sidewalk. Yeah. Okay. Get out of this. Gotta find the oops. These are some details of the articulation of the facade, and as you can see on the right of the screen, this is actually what we're using is a fire rated shadow box shaft wall condition along the lot line and the elevator override and the fire stair. And so you can see that this condition within the depth of the glazing system, behind that will be a shadow box. So this with the same glass treatment, and then this is the living area here on the facing the south here. And as Cass mentioned, we set this back 56 feet from the street and then 10 feet from the side yard. And then this sits right on top of the existing penthouse. A few details, glazing details, and then the jointing of the articulation of the diagrid. So the frame is reinforced and of the mullions, which acts also as, because the glass is actually very small, the whole wall and skylight system acts as the structure of the pavilion. And there is both translucent sun shading in the horizontal and vertical surfaces, as well as privacy shades for the privacy of the living condition here. And then this is a section through that happens to be through the elevator override, which shows the fire rated shaft wall and how the skylight goes over the override. On the rear of the building, we have this is the original penthouse, and then the 6th floor, and we removed the 2-story, 2 levels of the one was the artist studio, and the other was the research library. And what we did, we made this side yard extension come around, so we still get the north light into those rooms, into the area of the art storage where we actually show some of the pieces. This is for the artifacts, not for the painting. So, and then this is where the research library is, and that gets the northern light into that portion of the plant in the side yard. So comparing on the top row, comparing the new floor plan to the previous plan, which is in pink, where we had on the, these are the only levels that have changed, nothing else changed. We have the two-story high studio object that we took out, replaced it with just a roof terrace, and then both on the 4th and 5th floors, and then on the top level, this is the residence compared to where we had it before. It's basically about half, a little more than half the size. In section, what we had before was the 6th floor residence with the, there's the elevator bulkhead on the other side and then the stair bulkhead on this side. And what we've done is we've relocated the mechanical equipment and then we've encased the skylight of the pavilion over the bulkheads of the stair and the of the elevator in blue, in the blue area. For the elevations, this a comparison before, and the new elevation on the rear facing north, and then working our way around to the west elevation. Basically, the pavilion basically just covers we lowered the bulkhead and wrapped it around with the new pavilion. And then facing the south facade is the new pavilions on the right. And then on the easterly, we took off the bulk of the mass here and then pushed everything back to where the existing penthouse is. The materials haven't really changed, except the glass is a low iron clear glass, insulated with a low E coating, and then everything else is pretty much the same as what we had. Carved limestone sills and header courses. And then the 5th floor infill was the cement stucco, and then the brick, the brick coursing, which was part of the lower part of the side yard extension. And I think that's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is there anybody who would like to comment? I don't know if there's anybody in the public, because I'd like to keep this fairly quick since we're not ruling on this.
If there is anyone in the public who would like to speak about this, please raise your hand through the participants feature at the bottom of your screen or hit *9 on the phone. Low, wave at me if you.
Remember, we're not ruling on this, so
Yeah.
please don't take time unnecessarily.
Okay. I just see Alita's hand up then.
Okay, so we'll go to the committee and let's just take them in alphabetical order, whoever
Oh,
raised
okay.
their hands.
Oh, okay. Right now, the only person with their hand up was Alita, but she lowered it.
Let's go to Alita.
Okay.
Everyone, thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One, did the applicant receive the invitation from CBA to come back and present to us before you went to Landmarks?
I can respond to that. I believe that we received a letter from CBA after we had been calendared for public meeting with the Landmarks Commission.
Okay, well, you could have postponed it and come and talk to us and presented to us. So that to me says that the applicant herself, Jeannie, is not so interested in being a member of the community or a good member of the community, or you would have come back with our invitation. Second of all, what you did in your slides was compare your current design to the design that was rejected by Landmarks in February or March, right? So that instead of starting from scratch, you make it look so much better than something that was already not acceptable. So it's kind of an apples and oranges situation. To me, it's still a big glass box on the top of a beautiful building that doesn't deserve to have a big glass box on top of it. And I understand everything else about the nature of the times and the financials of it, but this was certainly a design element that she had intended and had in fact presented prior to the virus crisis and the financial aftermath. So that's all I have to say about that, but it was really disappointing that you chose not to come back. And even the nature of this presentation is somewhat misleading. So that's all I have to say. But thank you for coming back and presenting this now. I think it's very interesting to see the design. I just feel it's a shame that we didn't really have a chance to give our opinions, but thank you for appearing now. I should have started by saying that because I do appreciate you didn't have to do this. And so thank you for spending your time doing it.
If I can just very momentarily respond, I do believe that after the request was made to appear at this hearing or this meeting pre-LPC, I believe we did indicate that we would be happy to meet with the Landmarks Committee for a presentation prior to the June 30th calendar, but it fell after you had already met in June, and so unfortunately the calendar didn't support that.
Will, I want to say something. I don't know if I'm still muted.
You
or
are.
not.
You're good.
Okay, I just find that most recent explanation very disingenuous. And I don't understand. The applicant simply didn't want to come back to us. It's as simple as that, Alita. So thank you for making your comments. And I think we should move the agenda.
Jane, I agree. It's time to move the agenda. Again, we thank the team for coming back and explaining to us what they did. And Jane, I think you should take over for old business and new business.
Thank you. I will, as long as we're very brief. It's 5 after 9. Thank you, David. Will, we're going to move the agenda and go to new business. I think Elizabeth wanted to discuss the window master plan letter and what the next steps are.
Okay, Elizabeth, I'm gonna unmute you. We have to confirm it.
Am I on?
You are.
Okay. Yes, I just, and I don't think we can do it now because we haven't had any feedback from the letter. But I at some stage, I thought we ought to discuss where do we go from here, because it's all well to get it out there. What we want them to do is to act on it, and I think I assume we haven't had any response yet. Have we, Will?
No response. No response directly about the letter.
Okay. Well, we'll probably have to meet in August because Landmarks, it always seems to happen to us. Maybe we would have had a response. We can and have a more productive discussion when we know what, if anything, Landmarks responds to it. And then I hope we can perhaps we can individually make calls to organizations and politicians who will have had it and say that we hope we can count on your support when we go before Landmarks.
Thank you. So your thought would be to put it on the August agenda again and just see what happens in the intervening time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's do that. We'll put it on the agenda. For August. Any other items of new business?
Michelle has her hand up.
Michelle?
Yeah, I had emailed you and David just a very, very brief update, which actually Gail and I are just doing as a courtesy. It's not even necessary, but we decided we're having the forum. And so Gail and I have met. We'll continue to meet with frequency. And I just wanted to bring you up to date as to what we decided. So we have a purpose, the timing, our outreach focus, and our preliminary panel and participants and sponsors. But the primary thing is the purpose, and I'll just read it briefly, and then that'll be the end of it. I have more to report, but I don't need to inform and educate boards and residents about the importance of promoting appropriate master window plans, preserving the exterior integrity and appropriateness of pre-war or noteworthy buildings within a historic district, landmark buildings, and others, of the importance of preserving the historic nature and being excellent temporary stewards of these buildings, and to educate on the possible monetary benefits of preservation and repair. So we talked about when it would be. Gail and I agreed, and she'll comment whenever you want, Gail, just jump in. But we agreed that we would like it not to be a virtual meeting. So with that in mind, since that probably won't happen unless we have a vaccine, which probably takes us into 2021, if anything happens before that, we'll be prepared with our outline. We'd like to have it in a location that is historic. In the past, when I was getting the historic district, I've had meetings in one of the churches, so perhaps we can get a historic building. We want to concentrate on building boards within the historic district and individual landmarks, because we want this to be an education forum for those people who actually are stewards of buildings and can make an impact. It's not just a broad preservation forum that some of the elected officials have had or landmarks has had, which is terrific and very educational. But our point is really to reach the people that have a say in what's happening, and to stop some of the bleeding of what's happening, the abuse of these buildings. So the panels or participants would be, preservation architects. I think our committee should have a big role here, but we'll get preservation architects and also the sponsors of the historic, the neighborhood organizations, the preservation organizations, and the elected officials. So I just wanted to let you know that we have gotten started, and Gail and I will continue to meet as we move to next steps and we further define what our outreach is going to be and how we're going to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. And we'll just come back to you and give you updates as needed or as you request or whatever. We just wanted to keep you into the loop. So Gail, if I forgot anything or whatever.
Gail, yeah.
Okay. Yes, exactly what Michelle said. What we really want is to get as much input as we possibly can from the committee, any board member who might be interested, any member of the public, because it's going to take a lot of work. We have to get databases. We have to be able to identify residents in significant buildings. We have to be able to find out who the boards are that may have a master plan, may not. So any help that we can get so that whatever forum we end up with is really robust. And the bottom line is our advocacy to see what we can do to ensure in some manner in the future that master plans for windows will be appropriate for the buildings that we're addressing.
Thank you. I think the idea of having an in-person instead of a Zoom forum, I'm all for it, but we'll see what happens.
I have to see.
Yeah.
So should we put it on the agenda again for next month, or just wait till you tell us to put it on
Well,
the agenda?
you can, because we'll have, Michelle and I will continue to work as best we can so we can start to give you updates.
Okay,
Yeah,
very
we'll
good.
just give you updates as needed. It'll have to do in addition to the windows, of course, we're going to concentrate on exterior preservation. I see a lot of people just drilling and putting security cameras on the outside of the building. I don't know whether or not that went through landmarks and other things. So we want to educate, but we want to pinpoint. We want to get to the people who are the decision makers, not just have it board based. So that's going to be the bulk of the work. But I have some experience doing that when I worked for the historic district, because I had to do outreach in every one of the buildings. I'm hoping those contacts, it's many years now, but we'll see what I have them, but we'll see how many of them are viable at the moment. But we'll go from there and we'll fill you in as we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Gail. Any other new business items?
Alita has her hand up and Christina Davis has her hand up.
Thank you. It's not a new business item. It's a comment on the window master plan letter. 2 community boards so far have agreed to support us, and I'm not sure what to ask them to do. In addition, Will and I were invited to a meeting with Chair Sarah Carroll from the Landmarks Preservation Commission, because we've been sending them so many letters about issues that we see, and that will be at the beginning of September. So if you have anything that you would like us to raise, please feel free to send an email in the meantime. And please, Jane and David and anyone else, about what to ask the other supporting community boards to do. And I'll reach out again to the original ones, which was not all of Manhattan. Thank you.
Ali, one thing I think the other community boards could do is send a similar letter to our letter to Sarah Carroll. Do you think that that meeting with Sarah Carroll should be more broad-based? I'd really like David Halpern to be there.
I will ask them if we could bring David along.
Okay.
I think the co-chairs should be there.
Well, if I can, if at my school, I don't know what it's going to be like in September, but if I can be there, David, if you go, I will go. I'll take a sick day.
Okay.
I think it might be before school starts. It might be, or right after Labor Day. I don't know, but we'll see what
That's
happens.
when school starts. But anyway, just keep me informed, and I would very much like to go with David to be there. Thank
Noted.
you.
Thank you.
Is there a move to adjourn?
You do have Christina Davis. Who
Oh,
had her hand
sorry,
up.
sorry.
What? No. One quick question. Michelle answered part of my question. What community groups were you joining with? Which you're working on that. But have we informed Gail Brewer of our intention to have this forum, since she oversees the community boards?
Well, she's certainly going to be, you know, one of the people we go to, and one of the people you might consider a sponsor. So we'll certainly inform her. But I think maybe Gail and I just want to be a little further along before we reach out specifically to any elected official. But of course, she's going to be apprised, no question.
Okay.
Anything else, Christina?
No, thank you.
Is there
Wait,
a move to adjourn?
I have one more thing to say. I just want to be clear that Jane and David, you were always, you know far more than I do, and certainly far more than Will does too, if I could speak for Will with his headphones on. So yes, anyway, we will make the request.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. Second.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
I just
Thank
want
you,
to add a
guys.
comment about 3 East 89th Street. You know, they made that really long presentation, but it doesn't really matter. We were left out of the loop. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
And they knew it. They've got very smart people. So I didn't feel like thanking them for coming. Thank you. Just had to make that editorial comment.
But you know, in the past, with those changes, they would have been sent back to us by landmarks. And that's one of the big issues now. And I would hope that one of the things you can talk to Sarah Carroll about, I've written to her and I have personally spoken to her, asking her if we can have the same method with the staff as we've had with the commissioners. You know, I mean, I don't see any reason why if an applicant goes to the staff, there are usually multiple visits with the staff, why the staff can't send them back to us before the staff makes their ruling. You know, it's not.
Well, I think I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. I think we should just move to adjourn at this point.
I think we did.
You are adjourned. Yes.
We're adjourned.
Okay, very good.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned.
Good
Well, I'm
night.
going to be
Thank
leaving
you.
the meeting. So thank you, everyone, for
Wait.
coming. And we'll see you next month. I'm sure we'll have an August meeting. So to be continued.
Jane, before you go, I just want, we did send a letter to landmarks outlining it, while they should come back to us. They rejected it. We did raise the testimony at their.
Of course, no, I know all those things, Gail.
I know you and David,
Alita.
for everyone else. So I'm going now. I'm clicking leave. Goodbye. I just wanted to make it.
No, I know that, Alita. And it's great that you did that. I just didn't feel like thanking the applicant for returning to us when they totally ignored us, you know. But I appreciate, we have to be on the record. It's so important.
Yeah.
We're on the record, thanks to you, Alita.
Thank you.
So that's important.
I agree. Bye.
You know,
Thank you for staying
Because
up.
if we need a paper trail for, somebody might write a book about the whole thing someday. Okay. Thank you very much to everyone, and we'll see you in August.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.